The notification sound from my phone echoed through my cramped studio apartment in Brooklyn, cutting through the silence that had become my constant companion. Another family group chat I wasn't part of. Another celebration I wouldn't attend. Through my neighbor's thin walls, I could hear the Martinez family laughing over Sunday dinner, their voices warm with the kind of belonging I'd spent 28 years trying to understand. I set my phone face down on the makeshift desk I'd built from an old door and 2 filing cabinets. The blue glow of my laptop screen illuminated the financial spreadsheets that had become more familiar to me than my own family's faces. 3 years into building my digital marketing consultancy, and the numbers were finally starting to make sense. Small businesses across the tri-state area were beginning to trust me with their online presence, their dreams of growth resting in the algorithms and ad campaigns I crafted in this tiny space overlooking the Williamsburg Bridge. The autumn air carried the scent of coffee from the bodega downstairs and the distant hum of traffic on the BQE. October in New York had always been my favorite time of year. The leaves changing colors in Prospect Park, the way the city seemed to exhale after the oppressive heat of summer. But this October felt different, heavier somehow, weighted with the accumulation of small disappointments and forgotten invitations that had defined my relationship with my family. "Maya, you coming to Mom's birthday this weekend?" The text from my sister Jessica had arrived 2 hours ago, sitting unread among a dozen other messages I'd been avoiding. I knew the drill by now. The invitation would come last minute, almost as an afterthought, as if remembering I existed was an inconvenience. They had to check off their list. The casual tone, the assumption that I had no other plans, the complete lack of acknowledgement that this was the first time anyone had spoken to me in 3 weeks. Growing up in our split-level house in Elmhurst, Queens, I'd learned early that love in the Rodriguez family came with conditions. The house itself told the story of our hierarchy. Carlos's high school football trophies lined the mantelpiece, Jessica's pageant crowns displayed in the china cabinet, while my academic awards were relegated to a shoebox in the hall closet. My older brother Carlos was the golden child, star quarterback at Forest Hills High, full scholarship to Syracuse, now a successful real estate developer with a wife who looked like she stepped out of a Nordstrom catalog and 2 kids who attended private school in Westchester. Jessica was the social butterfly, the one who could make anyone laugh, who'd parlayed her natural charm into a career in public relations and a penthouse apartment in Manhattan's financial district. She had 15,000 Instagram followers who hung on her every perfectly curated post about brunch spots and Broadway shows. Every family gathering became an impromptu photo shoot, with Jessica directing us into positions that would look spontaneous online. Then there was me. Maya Elena Rodriguez, the quiet one who preferred books to parties, who stuttered when speaking to strangers, who chose computer science over communications and disappointed everyone in the process. While Carlos dominated dinner conversations with stories from his latest real estate deals, and Jessica regaled us with celebrity encounters from her PR events, I would sit at the corner of the table, picking at my food and contributing the occasional nod or forced laugh. My parents, Maria and Roberto, had emigrated from El Salvador in 1985, with dreams of their children becoming doctors, lawyers, maybe teachers, professions that commanded respect in their community, careers they could brag about to their neighbors at St. Bartholomew's Catholic Church. My father worked double shifts at a manufacturing plant in Long Island City for 23 years, his hands permanently stained with machine oil, his back bent from decades of manual labor. My mother cleaned houses in Forest Hills and Great Neck during the day and worked as a hospital aide 3 nights a week, coming home exhausted but determined to save enough money for our college educations. A daughter who wanted to play with computers didn't fit their vision of American success. When I'd tried to explain what digital marketing was, my father would nod politely and change the subject to Carlos's latest property acquisition. When I'd shown them my first client's website, celebrating the 40% increase in their online sales, my mother had patted my hand and asked when I was going to meet a nice boy and settle down. The last family dinner I'd attended was 8 months ago. Carlos's engagement party at some upscale restaurant in Midtown where the appetizers cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. I'd sat at the far end of the table, nodding politely, while relatives I barely knew asked what I was still doing with my life. Their voices heavy with the implication that at 28, I should have figured it out by now. My cousin Elena, who worked as a bank teller, had actually patted my shoulder sympathetically and said, "Don't worry, mija. Not everyone can be successful like Carlos. You'll find your path eventually." "She's in computers," my mother had explained with a dismissive wave when Aunt Carmen asked about my career, as if my work was some hobby I'd eventually outgrow. No one asked about my clients, the small businesses I was helping thrive, or the satisfaction I found in watching a mom-and-pop restaurant's online orders triple after implementing my strategies. No one wanted to hear about the late nights I'd spent learning Facebook's advertising algorithms, or the thrill I felt when a campaign I'd designed generated a 300% return on investment. During the dinner, I'd excused myself to use the restroom and found Jessica taking selfies in the mirror, adjusting her makeup for the third time that evening. "Maya, you should really consider getting some professional headshots done," she'd said without looking at me. "I know someone who could help you look more polished, for job interviews and things." The implication was clear. I wasn't successful enough to warrant professional photos, wasn't accomplished enough to need a polished image. I was the family member who needed help, who required fixing, who existed in their peripheral vision as a project they might get around to someday. My phone buzzed again, jolting me back to the present. Another message in the family group chat I could see notifications for but couldn't access. They'd probably changed the chat name again, added some inside joke from a gathering I wasn't invited to. The exclusion wasn't malicious. It was worse than that. It was casual, thoughtless, the kind of forgetting that happens when someone never really mattered to begin with. Last month, I'd discovered they'd planned a family barbecue at Carlos's house in Westchester. I found out about it 3 days after. It happened when Jessica posted a group photo on Instagram with the caption, "Family is everything." I was the only sibling missing from the frame, the only child not represented in their definition of everything. When I'd called my mother to ask why I hadn't been invited, her response had been a masterclass in casual cruelty. "Oh, mija, we thought you were too busy with your computer work. You never seem interested in family events anyway." The accusation stung because it contained just enough truth to feel justified. I had stopped showing up as enthusiastically as I once had, but only after years of feeling invisible even when I was physically present. Outside my window, the October wind scattered leaves across the empty street. Halloween decorations hung from fire escapes and bodega windows, reminding me of childhood Octobers when Jessica and I would plan our costumes together, when Carlos would let me tag along with his friends for trick-or-treating, when being part of the Rodriguez family felt like a privilege rather than a performance I could never quite master. Those memories felt like artifacts from someone else's life now. Somewhere along the way, I'd become the family member they loved in theory, but forgot in practice. The sister they'd invite to major milestones but exclude from casual gatherings. The daughter they'd mention in Christmas letters, but forget to call on birthdays. I pulled up my business banking app, a habit I'd developed over the past year as my revenue had started climbing. The number at the top of the screen still felt surreal. $847,326.15. Nearly $1 million, built one client at a time, one successful campaign after another. Companies were starting to seek me out instead of the other way around, and I'd recently hired 2 freelancers to help handle the workload. My biggest success story was a family-owned bakery in Park Slope called Flower and Dreams. When I'd first met the owners, Sandra and Miguel Torres, they were on the verge of closing after 30 years in business. Chain coffee shops had moved into the neighborhood, stealing their regular customers with aggressive pricing and convenient locations. Their beautiful, handcrafted pastries and traditional Mexican wedding cakes weren't enough to compete with the convenience of grab-and-go coffee culture. I'd spent 3 months developing a comprehensive digital strategy for them. Instagram campaigns, showcasing their artisanal process, targeted Facebook ads reaching couples planning weddings, a loyalty program that rewarded longtime customers and attracted new ones. Within 6 months, They had a waiting list for their weekend wedding cake, consultations, and had hired 3 additional bakers to keep up with demand. Sandra had cried when she'd hugged me at their 6-month anniversary celebration. "You saved our family's business," she'd whispered. "You gave us our dream back." Miguel had insisted on naming a new pastry after me. The Maya Special, a tresi. Leche's cake with dulce de leche frosting that had become their bestseller. The Torres family invited me to their children's birthday parties, their anniversary celebrations, their holiday gatherings. I was more involved in their lives than I was in my own family's, more valued by people I'd known for less than a year than by people who'd known me my entire life. But success, I was learning, tastes different when you have no one to share it with. The champagne I'd bought to celebrate landing my biggest client yet, a chain of boutique fitness studios that wanted to expand nationwide, was still unopened in my refrigerator, waiting for a celebration that never came. I'd called my mother that night, excited to share the news, but she'd been watching her telenovela and had rushed me off the phone after 30 seconds of distracted mm-hms. My laptop chimed with an email notification. Another potential client, this one a family-owned restaurant in New Jersey, looking to modernize their online presence. Giuseppe's Italian kitchen had been struggling since the owner's son had moved to California, leaving the 70-year-old patriarch to manage both the restaurant and its non-existent digital marketing. The email was written in broken English, full of hope and desperation in equal measure. The familiar thrill of a new challenge pushed away the loneliness, at least temporarily. This was what I was good at, understanding what people needed, even when they couldn't articulate it themselves. I could see Giuseppe's potential already. The Instagram posts showcasing handmade pasta, the Facebook ads targeting busy families looking for authentic Italian takeout, the loyalty program that would bring customers back week after week. Ironic, considering I'd never been able to figure out what my own family needed from me or how to make them see my value the way my clients did. I opened a new document and began crafting my response, my fingers finding their rhythm on the keyboard. In this digital world I'd built for myself, I was confident, successful, valuable. Here, people listened when I spoke, implemented my suggestions, thanked me for changing their businesses, their lives. Here, I mattered. The clock on my laptop showed 11:47 p.m., but I wasn't tired. Sleep had become elusive lately, my mind too busy processing the strange reality of my life. Professionally thriving while personally isolated, financially successful, while emotionally bankrupt, surrounded by grateful clients while ignored by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I walked to my small kitchen and made another cup of coffee, the routine as familiar as breathing. Through the window, I could see lights still on in apartments across the courtyard. Other people living their lives, probably talking to family members who returned their calls, probably making plans for weekend gatherings they'd actually be invited to attend. My phone sat silent on the counter, the unanswered text from Jessica still waiting for a response I wasn't sure I wanted to give. Mom's birthday dinner would be the same as always, a performance where I played the role of dutiful daughter while feeling like an understudy who'd never be promoted to the main cast. But as I worked late into the night, the city's heartbeat pulsing beyond my windows, I told myself that success would be enough. That building something meaningful from nothing was its own kind of family, its own kind of love. That the clients who trusted me with their dreams were creating a different kind of chosen family, one based on mutual respect and genuine appreciation. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd become an expert at helping others connect with their audiences while remaining invisible to the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But maybe that was the price of success. Learning to find validation from strangers, because the people closest to you had never learned how to see your worth. I had no idea how wrong I was, or how much that was about to change. I had no idea that my biological family was about to discover exactly what I was worth, and that everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the true meaning of family was about to be tested in ways I never could have imagined. As the clock struck midnight and October 15th became October 16th, I was just Maya Rodriguez, the invisible daughter, the forgotten sister, the family member who existed in the margins of other people's stories. By this time next year, I would be someone entirely different, not because I had changed, but because the world would finally see what had been there all along. 6 months later, the spring air carried the scent of possibility through my new office space in WeWork Dumbo. The Brooklyn Bridge stretched across my window like a promise, connecting the life I'd known to the future I was building brick by brick, client by client, success by success. My team had grown to 5 full-time employees, and we'd just signed our biggest contract yet, a national retail chain looking to revamp their entire digital strategy for their 47 locations across the Northeast. The move from my studio apartment to this sleek, glass-walled office had felt like crossing into another universe, where once I'd worked alone in a space barely larger than a walk-in closet, I now had a conference room where I could host client meetings, a dedicated workspace for each team member, and a kitchen area where we gathered for coffee breaks that felt more like family dinners than business meetings. Maya, the Goldstein account, wants to schedule a call about expanding to their West Coast locations. Sarah, my operations manager, stuck her head through my office door. At 24, she had the kind of energy I envied, the confidence that came from growing up believing your voice mattered. She'd graduated from NYU's business school with ideas about revolutionizing digital marketing, and somehow she'd decided that my small agency was the place to make it happen. "Set it up for Thursday morning," I replied, not looking up from the quarterly projections spreadsheet on my screen. The numbers were almost too good to believe. By year's end, we'd likely cross the $2 million mark in annual revenue. My personal bank balance had swelled to just over $1.3 million, a figure that felt simultaneously thrilling and isolating. The Goldstein account had started as a single jewelry store in Manhattan's Diamond District, a third-generation family business, run by an elderly man who'd been skeptical of computer advertising until his granddaughter had convinced him to try something new. Now, 6 months later, they were opening their 4th location and had become one of my most vocal advocates, referring other family businesses faster than I could take them on. My phone sat silent on my desk, as it had for the past 3 weeks. No missed calls from family, no texts asking how I was doing, no casual check-ins or invitations to impromptu gatherings. Jessica had posted photos from her birthday party on Instagram, a rooftop celebration in Manhattan with 30 of their closest friends, all raising glasses toward the skyline I could see from my office window. I hadn't been invited, hadn't even known it was happening until I saw the images scrolling through my feed at midnight while I was working on a campaign proposal. The photos showed everyone I'd grown up with, cousins from both sides of the family, high school friends, college roommates, all laughing and posing with the kind of casual intimacy that comes from shared history and mutual investment. In one photo, my mother was there, wearing the dress I'd bought her for Christmas, smiling, brighter than I'd seen her smile in years. In another, Carlos was telling some story that had everyone doubled over with laughter. I'd studied those photos like an anthropologist examining artifacts from a lost civilization, trying to understand how I'd become so completely extraneous to a family I'd once thought I belonged to. The comments section was full of inside jokes and references to shared memories I wasn't part of, a language I'd never learned to speak fluently. The last conversation I'd had with my mother was 2 months ago, a stilted phone call where she'd asked if I was still doing the computer thing and reminded me that my cousin Patricia's daughter was getting married in the summer. The invitation, she mentioned casually, would probably be coming soon. It never did. When I saw photos from the wedding on Facebook 3 weeks later, I realized I'd been the only grandchild not invited. Maya? David, my lead developer, appeared at my door, breaking me out of my family-induced spiral. The Chen family's restaurant campaign just hit 300% ROI. They want to know if we can handle their other 2 locations. I smiled, the first genuine one I'd felt all day. The Chens reminded me why I'd started this business in the first place. When I'd first met Linda Chen, she'd been working 16-hour days trying to keep their family restaurant afloat after her husband Wayne's heart attack had forced him into semi-retirement. Their decades-old establishment in Flushing was slowly losing customers to chain restaurants with flashier marketing and bigger budgets. The dining room that had once been packed every night was half empty most evenings, and Linda had been considering selling the business her parents had started 40 years earlier. Now, 6 months later, they had a waiting list every weekend and were planning to expand to 2 additional locations in Manhattan and Brooklyn. But more than that, they'd become something like a surrogate family to me. Linda always asked about my personal life with the genuine concern of a mother. Her husband Wayne insisted I try new dishes every time I visited, and their teenage daughter Amy showed me photos from her school events as if I were an aunt who actually cared about her achievements. Tell them yes, and see if we can schedule a family dinner there next week, I said. I want to see the results in person, and I want the whole team to celebrate together. David grinned. You know Linda's going to try to feed the entire team again. Last time she sent us home with enough leftovers to last a week. That's the point. I laughed. That's what family does. The word hung in the air between us, heavier than I'd intended. David, who'd become one of my closest friends over the past year, understood the subtext. He'd been there during the late nights when I'd worked through holidays because I had nowhere else to go. Had seen me scroll through family photos on social media with the kind of longing usually reserved for lost loves. It was a stark contrast to my biological family, where I felt like a stranger at every gathering. Carlos had gotten married the previous fall in a lavish ceremony in the Hamptons that had been featured in the local society pages. I'd received an invitation, expensive cardstock with gold embossing that had probably cost more than most people's weekly salary. But the lack of a +1 and my placement at the singles table with distant cousins I'd met twice spoke volumes about my role in the family hierarchy. The wedding had been beautiful and cold, full of people who knew each other's inside jokes and shared memories I wasn't part of. I'd spent the cocktail hour making small talk with great aunts who confused me with other relatives, the dinner listening to toasts that referenced childhood stories I'd apparently been absent for, and the reception watching everyone else dance to songs that seemed to hold special meaning for them. I'd left after the dinner, claiming an early morning meeting, and spent the night in my apartment eating Chinese takeout and wondering how it was possible to feel so alone in a room full of people who shared my DNA. The next morning, Jessica had posted a photo of the bride's bouquet toss on Instagram, captioning it, "All the single ladies," with a laughing emoji. I was nowhere to be seen in the photo, having already been driving across the Triborough Bridge when the bouquet left the bride's hands. My computer pinged with a calendar reminder. Mom's birthday. Consider calling. I'd set the reminder months ago, during one of my attempts to be a better daughter, to bridge the gap that seemed to widen with every passing year. But staring at it now, I felt the familiar weight of one-sided effort, the exhaustion that comes from being the only person trying to maintain a relationship. When had I become the only one responsible for remembering birthdays, for making phone calls, for extending invitations that were rarely reciprocated? When had loving my family become a solo performance where I was both the actor and the only audience member? Instead of calling, I sent a text. Happy birthday, Mom. Hope you have a wonderful day. Simple, safe, requiring no emotional investment. That wouldn't be returned. The response came 3 hours later. Thank you, Mija. Family dinner Sunday if you want to come. If I wanted to come. Not, we'd love to see you, or we miss you, or it wouldn't be the same without you. Just the casual indifference of an optional invitation, the kind you extend because it's expected, not because it's desired. The kind of invitation that makes it clear you're being accommodated rather than welcomed. I looked around my office, the awards on the wall from business organizations I'd never heard of before starting this company, the thank you notes from grateful clients whose lives I'd genuinely improved, the photos of successful campaigns that had changed the trajectory of family businesses. This was my family now, built from scratch with people who chose to be here, who valued what I brought to the table, who celebrated my successes and supported me through challenges. Sarah knocked and entered with a bottle of champagne and a small cake from the bakery downstairs. "We just landed the Morrison Group account," she announced, her eyes bright with excitement. "It's official. We're their exclusive digital marketing partner for all 47 locations." "This is huge, Maya. This changes everything." The team gathered in my office within minutes. 5 people who'd become the closest thing to siblings I'd had in years. Marcus, our creative director, had left a prestigious agency in Manhattan to join my scrappy Brooklyn startup. Jennifer, our social media manager, had turned down offers from Fortune 500 companies to stay with us. Tom, our data analyst, could have doubled his salary at any tech company in Silicon Valley, but chose to remain part of our tight-knit family. As we toasted our success with champagne served in coffee mugs because we hadn't thought to buy proper glasses, I felt a warmth I'd been chasing my entire life. The feeling of being seen, valued, celebrated for who I was, rather than tolerated for who I wasn't. "Maya, you've built something incredible here," said Marcus, raising his makeshift champagne flute. "In 2 years, you've created one of the most sought-after boutique agencies in the city. You should be proud." I was proud. But as the celebration wound down and everyone returned to their desks, I found myself staring at my phone, at the unanswered text from my mother. Part of me wanted to drive to Queens, to show up at Sunday dinner, and try once more to find my place at that table. But I'd learned that love shouldn't feel like begging, that family shouldn't be something you had to earn over and over again. Instead, I opened my laptop and began working on a proposal for a new client, a nonprofit organization that helped immigrants start small businesses. The organization, called New American Dreams, was run by a woman named Carmen Delgado, who reminded me of my mother in all the best ways. She'd arrived from Honduras 15 years ago with nothing but determination and a dream of helping other immigrants navigate the complex world of American entrepreneurship. Their current website looked like it had been built in 1995, and their social media presence was virtually non-existent. But their mission was powerful, their impact undeniable, and their need for professional marketing help desperate. They wanted to reach more immigrants who could benefit from their services, to attract donors who could fund their programs, and to build partnerships with established businesses willing to mentor new entrepreneurs. It was the kind of work that fed my soul, using my skills to help people build something meaningful from nothing, just like I had. As I crafted the proposal, outlining strategies for multilingual social media campaigns and targeted advertising to reach immigrant communities throughout New York, I felt the familiar satisfaction of solving problems that mattered. The sun was setting over Brooklyn, painting my office in shades of gold and amber, when my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Unknown calls were usually sales pitches or wrong numbers, but something made me answer. "Is this Maya Rodriguez from Rodriguez Digital Strategies?" The voice was professional, slightly familiar. "Yes, this is Maya. This is Jennifer Walsh from Forbes magazine. I've been following your company's growth, and I'd like to discuss featuring you in an upcoming article about young entrepreneurs who are changing the game in their industries. Would you be available for an interview?" I sat in stunned silence for a moment. Forbes, the magazine that graced waiting rooms in my family's dreams, the publication they'd mentioned reverently whenever discussing real success, the magazine that had featured Carlos once, briefly, in a roundup of rising real estate developers, a mention he'd framed and hung in his office like a diploma. Yes, I'd be honored, I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. We scheduled the interview for the following week, and after I hung up, I sat alone in my office as the city lights began to twinkle beyond my windows. This was it, the kind of recognition that transcended family approval, the validation that came from outside the narrow world of conditional love and arbitrary expectations. As I worked late into the night, refining campaigns and responding to client emails, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done chasing approval from people who couldn't see my worth. I would build my empire, my chosen family, my own definition of success, and let the results speak for themselves. I had no idea that my biological family was about to discover exactly what I was worth and that everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the true meaning of family was about to be tested in ways I never could have imagined. The Forbes article would change more than just my business prospects. It would fundamentally alter every relationship I'd ever taken for granted. But that night, as I prepared to leave my office and return to my Brooklyn apartment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The quiet confidence that comes from knowing your worth, regardless of who recognizes it. Tomorrow, I would start preparing for an interview that would introduce me to the world as Maya Rodriguez, successful entrepreneur. Tonight, I was content being Maya Rodriguez, the woman who'd built something beautiful from nothing, who'd created a family from colleagues, who'd learned that sometimes the greatest success is simply knowing who you are when no one else is watching. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late September, just as I was reviewing the quarterly reports that would officially make me a multimillionaire. My company, Rodriguez Digital Strategies, had been featured in Entrepreneur magazine the week before, a full-page spread about young entrepreneurs changing the game, complete with a photo of me in my Dumbo office, the Manhattan skyline stretching behind me like a promise kept, my team visible through the glass conference room walls, mid-brainstorm session for our latest campaign. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished concrete floors. I'd upgraded the office space 3 months earlier, expanding into the adjacent suite to accommodate our growing team. What had started as a scrappy 5-person operation now employed 12 people full-time, with 3 more contractors working remotely. The walls were lined with awards from marketing organizations, framed thank you letters from clients, and a growing collection of press clippings that documented our rise from startup to industry player. Maya Rodriguez? The voice on the phone was crisp, professional, with the kind of confidence that came from working at a publication that could make or break careers with a single article. Yes, this is Maya. This is Jennifer Walsh from Forbes magazine. We're doing a feature on the top digital marketing agencies in New York, and your company keeps coming up in our research. Multiple industry experts have mentioned Rodriguez Digital Strategies as one of the most innovative and effective agencies in the city. Would you be available for an interview this week? I set down my coffee cup, grateful that Jennifer couldn't. See my hands shaking slightly. Forbes. The magazine that had defined success in my family's eyes for as long as I could remember. The publication my father read religiously at the public library every month, running his work-calloused fingers over the glossy pages featuring people who'd made something of themselves in America. I'd be honored, I managed, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. We scheduled the interview for Thursday afternoon, and Jennifer mentioned they'd want to send a photographer as well. We're particularly interested in your approach to working with family-owned businesses and immigrant entrepreneurs, she said. Your success rate with that demographic is unprecedented. After hanging up, I sat in my office chair, staring out at the city that had become my kingdom. Built one client at a time, one successful campaign after another. The numbers on my latest financial report seemed almost fictional. $2.3 million in annual revenue, with projections to hit $5 million within 18 months. My personal net worth had crossed the $1.8 million threshold, making me wealthier than anyone in my extended family, including Carlos with his real estate empire. The interview took place on a Thursday afternoon when the autumn light turned my office into something that looked more like a magazine spread than a workplace. Jennifer Walsh arrived with a photographer and a digital recorder, along with the kind of preparation that only came from thorough research. She knew about my major clients, my innovative campaigns, even some of the smaller success stories that I'd never publicized. Tell me about the Chen family's restaurant, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. I understand you took them from struggling to thriving in less than 6 months. I found myself talking more openly than I had in any previous interview, describing not just the strategies and tactics, but the emotional investment I made in each client's success. Jennifer asked about my background, my education, my family's immigration story, and how it had shaped my approach to working with other immigrant-owned businesses. Your client retention rate is remarkable, she noted, flipping through her notes. 96% of your clients have been with you for over a year, and many have become advocates who refer other businesses. That's unusual in this industry. I don't just manage their marketing, I explained. I invest in their dreams. When I take on a client, I'm not just trying to increase their revenue. I'm trying to help them build the life they came to America to create. The photographer captured me at my desk, in the conference room with my team, and standing by the window with the Brooklyn Bridge in the background. Each shot felt like documentation of a life I'd built against all odds, proof of worthiness that extended far beyond family approval. 3 weeks later, the piece ran both online and in print. The Millionaire Next Door: How Maya Rodriguez Built a 7-Figure Agency While You Weren't Looking. The article was 6 pages long, with multiple photos and pull quotes that made my work sound revolutionary rather than simply effective. They'd included revenue figures, client testimonials, and a sidebar about the growing trend of boutique agencies outperforming larger firms by specializing in underserved markets. The online version went live at 6 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. By 7 a.m., my phone had started ringing. My assistant Sarah burst into my office at 9:15, tablet in hand, and barely contained excitement radiating from her every gesture. Maya, you need to see this. The Forbes article went viral on LinkedIn. We've gotten 43 new client inquiries since yesterday morning, including 3 Fortune 500 companies. The Today Show wants to interview you next week. And she paused, her expression shifting to something between amusement and concern. Your phone's been ringing nonstop. They said it's family? I looked at my personal phone, which I'd silenced during a client meeting. 24 missed calls. 15 from numbers I didn't recognize, but 9 from contacts I hadn't heard from in months. Mom, Carlos, Jessica, Aunt Carmen, Cousin Miguel, who I'd spoken to exactly twice in the past 5 years, my godmother, Esperanza, who hadn't called since my college graduation, Cousin Elena, who'd never acknowledged my birthday cards, and even my great-uncle Hector, who I wasn't sure knew how to use a cell phone. The voicemails painted a picture of family members suddenly, discovering I existed, each message more effusive than the last. My mother's voice was higher than usual with what I recognized as excited nervousness. Mija, we saw the article. Oh, Dios mío, we had no idea. Forbes magazine. Wait until I tell the ladies at church. Call me back, okay? We need to talk about family dinner this weekend. It's been too long since we've seen you. Jessica's message was different. Carefully casual, but with an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite identify. Oh my God, Maya. Why didn't you tell us about your company? We had no idea it was so successful. Forbes. I can't believe my little sister is in Forbes. Call me back, I have so many questions, and I want to help. You know I'm in PR, right? We should collaborate. I have connections at major publications. We could really amplify this coverage. Carlos's voicemail was the longest, his tone a mixture of big brother protectiveness and something else I couldn't quite identify. Maya, we need to talk immediately. I just finished reading the Forbes article 3 times. I had no idea what you were building over there. Listen, I've got capital sitting around doing nothing, and connections in real estate development, lots of businesses that could use your services. We should discuss family investments, maybe some partnerships. There's serious money to be made here. Call me back today. But it was the voicemail from my father that stopped me cold. Roberto Rodriguez had never left me a voicemail in his life. His English, though improved over the decades, was still heavily accented, and he'd always been too proud to struggle with words when my mother could translate. But there he was, his voice thick with emotion I'd never heard before. Maya, mi hija, I am so proud. Your mother, she read me the whole article in Spanish. You are a millionaire? You help other families like us? I am sorry we did not understand. Call your papa, okay? Te amo mucho. I sat in my office chair, staring at my phone as if it were a foreign object. These were the same people who'd forgotten my birthday 3 months ago, who hadn't returned my last 6 calls. who treated my presence at family gatherings like an unexpected obligation they had to endure with polite tolerance. Aunt Carmen, who'd spent years asking when I was going to get a real job, had left a breathless message about how she'd always known I was special, how she'd been telling everyone at her book club about her brilliant niece who worked with computers. The same woman who'd introduced me to her friends as the one who's still figuring things out now wanted to schedule lunch to discuss business opportunities. The intercom buzzed, interrupting my spiral through voice messages. "Maya, there's a Maria Rodriguez here to see you. She says she's your mother and that it's a surprise." My stomach dropped. My mother had never visited my office. She'd never even asked for the address. In fact, the last time she'd shown interest in my work was 6 months ago, when she'd asked if I could help her friend's son with his computer because he was having trouble sending emails. "Send her up," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Mother appeared in my doorway 5 minutes later, dressed in her best church outfit, a navy blue dress with matching jacket that I'd only seen at weddings and funerals. She'd clearly spent time on her appearance. Fresh lipstick, her graying hair styled in the way she reserved for special occasions, the pearl earrings my father had given her for their 25th anniversary. She looked around my office with wide eyes, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the awards on the walls, the team of employees visible through the glass partition. Her gaze lingered on the framed Forbes article that Sarah had mounted on the wall that morning, then moved to the photos of me with various clients, the testimonial letters, the evidence of a success she'd never bothered to investigate. "Mija," she said, her voice soft with something that might have been regret. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Tell you what, Mom?" "About all this." She gestured around the office with hands that trembled slightly. "The magazine says you're a millionaire. You have 12 employees. You help families start businesses. You're successful. Really successful." She paused. And for a moment, I saw not the woman who'd dismissed my dreams, but the mother who'd worked double shifts at the hospital to pay for my college education. "We didn't know." "You never asked," I said simply, not unkindly, but with the weight of years behind the words. She sat down in the chair across from my desk, looking smaller than I remembered, older than the vibrant woman who could work 16-hour days and still have energy to cook Sunday dinner for extended family. "We thought, your father and I, we thought you were just doing some computer work from home, like freelancing. You never talked about employees or offices or..." She gestured helplessly. "Money." Because every time I tried to explain what I was building, you changed the subject, I interrupted gently. "Because when I invited you to come see my first office space, you were too busy with Carlos's housewarming party. Because when I tried to tell you about my clients and their success stories, you asked when I was going to find a husband instead." The silence stretched between us, filled with the sounds of my team working beyond the glass walls, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the productive hum of a business that existed because no one had believed in it but me. Through the window, tugboats moved slowly down the East River, carrying cargo between worlds that might as well have been different planets. "Your cousin Elena called me this morning," Mom said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "She saw the article online before I did. She wanted to know if you need investors, if there are opportunities for family members to get involved. Then Jessica called, then Carlos, then your father's entire side of the family. Everyone wants to know why we never told them how successful you were." Of course they did. Elena, who hadn't spoken to me since she'd failed to invite me to her daughter's quinceañera 2 years ago, suddenly saw opportunity where she'd once seen only disappointment. The same Elena who'd told my mother that maybe I should aim lower when I'd mentioned wanting to start my own business. "And what did you tell them?" I asked. My mother's eyes filled with tears, and I felt the familiar guilt that came with causing her pain. But beneath the guilt was something new, a protective instinct for the version of myself who'd built this empire in silence, who'd celebrated every milestone alone, who'd learned to find validation from strangers because the people closest to her couldn't see her worth. I told them the truth, she said. That we didn't know because we never paid attention. That we failed you as a family. She reached into her purse and pulled out a printed copy of the Forbes article, the pages already, worn from multiple readings. I've read this 5 times, Maya. You talk about helping immigrant families build their dreams, about understanding what it means to start over in America. You learned that from us, from our story, but we never saw you carry it forward. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and saw something I'd never noticed before. The weight of regret in her shoulders, the way her hands fidgeted with her wedding ring when she was nervous, the pride and shame warring in her expression as she tried to reconcile the daughter she thought she knew with the woman described in a major business publication. We love you, Maya, she said. We've always loved you. I know you love me, I replied. But love and showing love are different things. Love and making space for someone in your life are different things. Love and believing in someone's dreams are different things. My phone buzzed again. Carlos, for the 3rd time that hour. In the past 2 days, I'd received more attention from my family than I had in the previous year combined. LinkedIn notifications poured in from relatives wanting to connect professionally. My Instagram followers had tripled overnight, mostly family members and old acquaintances who'd apparently never noticed my account before, but were now eager to engage with my success. I need to get back to work, Mom, I said, standing up. But if you want to have dinner, just you and me, not a family gathering where everyone wants to talk about business opportunities, I'd like that. She nodded, wiping her eyes with a tissue from her purse. What about this Sunday? Your father wants to see you too, but maybe we start with just us? Just you and me first, I said firmly. We have a lot to talk about, and we need to do it without an audience. After she left, I sat alone in my office as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the awards and accolades that documented my journey from invisible daughter to Forbes featured entrepreneur. My phone continued to buzz with calls and messages from family members who'd suddenly remembered my existence, colleagues who wanted to congratulate me, and potential clients who'd found my story inspiring. Sarah knocked and entered with a stack of meeting requests and a concerned expression. The Today Show confirmed for next Tuesday. Entrepreneur Magazine wants a follow-up interview, and 3 different podcasts have reached out. Also, she paused. There's someone from Goldman Sachs. Online too. Something about acquisition opportunities? I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere, processing the strange alchemy that had transformed me from invisible to indispensable overnight. Nothing about me had changed. Not my work, not my achievements, not my character, not my love for my family. But a magazine article had shifted the family dynamic in ways that years of my own efforts couldn't. The afternoon brought a parade of congratulatory calls from clients, colleagues, and industry connections. Linda Chen called to tell me she'd framed the article and hung it next to the family photos in the restaurant. You are famous now, she said in her heavily accented English, but you are still our Maya, still part of our family. That evening, as I prepared to leave the office, I caught my reflection in the window. A successful businesswoman in a tailored suit, backed by the glittering lights of Manhattan and Brooklyn. I looked like someone who belonged in this world I'd built. Someone who commanded respect and attention. Someone whose opinions mattered and whose achievements were celebrated. But the woman in the reflection was also someone who'd learned a valuable lesson about the difference between being valued for who you are and being valued for what you have. And as my phone buzzed with yet another call from a family member I hadn't heard from in months, I realized that the hardest test of my success wasn't building the business. It was deciding what to do with the love that only appeared when the my dollar signs did. The Forbes article had changed everything and nothing. I was still the same Maya who'd spent years feeling invisible at family gatherings, who'd built a business from scratch in a studio apartment, who'd learned to find family among clients and colleagues, But now I was also Maya Rodriguez, Forbes featured, entrepreneur, millionaire businesswoman, success story. The question that would define the next chapter of my life wasn't how to handle my newfound fame or manage the flood of new opportunities. It was how to navigate relationships with people who suddenly saw my worth, how to distinguish between genuine remorse and opportunistic attention, and how to protect the heart that had learned to love itself in the silence of other people's indifference. As I turned off the lights in my office and headed home to Brooklyn, I carried with me the weight of choice, the power to decide who deserved access to the success I'd built without them, and who had earned the right to celebrate achievements they'd never encouraged. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new tests of the wisdom I'd gained from years of building something beautiful in the shadows. The girl who'd been invisible for so long was about to learn what it meant to be seen, and whether the recognition she'd always craved would be worth the price of the relationships it would change forever. The reservation at Le Bernardin had been Carlos's idea, his attempt to make amends for 28 years of casual dismissal wrapped in Michelin-starred elegance. "Let me take you somewhere nice," he'd said during our first real conversation. In 2 years, his voice carrying a humility I'd never heard from him before. "We have a lot to catch up on, and I want to do this right." The restaurant felt like neutral territory, expensive enough to signal that he was taking this seriously, public enough to keep emotions in check, formal enough to match the gravity of everything left unsaid between us. I arrived early, partly from nervous energy, and partly because punctuality had become a professional habit that extended to personal life. The restaurant was everything I'd imagined from reading about it in food magazines, sleek, sophisticated with the kind of understated luxury that whispered rather than shouted wealth. The maitre d' led me to a corner table with a view of Central Park, where the late autumn leaves created a tapestry of gold and crimson against the gray November sky. Carlos was 10 minutes late, which was early for him. Growing up, he'd operated on what our family called Carlos time, consistently 15 to 20 minutes behind schedule, because he'd always assumed people would wait for him. They usually did. But today he looked flustered, apologetic, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first month's rent, but sitting uncomfortably like he was playing dress-up in someone else's clothes. "You look good, Maya," he said, standing to hug me awkwardly. "Successful. Really successful." "I've always been successful," I replied, not unkindly but with the weight of truth behind the words. "You just never noticed." He winced, acknowledging the hit, with a self-deprecating smile that reminded me of the big brother who'd taught me to ride a bike in the schoolyard behind our house. "Fair enough. More than fair, actually. Listen, I owe you an apology. We all do. But I'm starting with mine because I think I might have been the worst." He fidgeted with his water glass, a gesture I remembered from childhood when he'd broken something and was working up the courage to confess to our parents. The golden boy who'd never had to apologize for anything looked genuinely uncomfortable with the unfamiliar territory of accountability. "Because you never asked," I said, echoing the conversation I'd had with our mother 3 weeks earlier. "Because I'm an ass," he corrected quickly. "Because I was so caught up in my own life, my own version of success, my own need to be the star of every family story, that I couldn't see yours. Because I treated you like background music when you should have been the headline." The waiter appeared with leather-bound menus that required a small loan to navigate, but Carlos waved him away. "We're still deciding," he said, then leaned forward, with an intensity I'd rarely seen from him outside of business negotiations. "Maya, I read the Forbes article 6 times. I showed it to Rebecca, to my business partners, to anyone who would listen. I had no idea what you'd built. And then I realized it's not that I had no idea, it's that I never bothered to find out. Because I wasn't worth finding out about," I said, the words coming out sharper than I'd intended. "Because I was too selfish to see past my own nose," he corrected. "Because I'd gotten used to being the successful one, the one everyone talked about at family dinners, the one whose achievements got framed and hung on Mom's wall. When you started your business, I think part of me was threatened by the idea that someone else in the family might be building something impressive. I studied his face, looking for the manipulation I'd learned to expect from family members who suddenly needed something from me. But what I saw instead was something I'd never seen from Carlos before. Genuine vulnerability, the kind that comes from recognizing you've been fundamentally wrong about something important. "Tell me about your company," he said. Not the Forbes version with all the impressive statistics. The real version. What it was like building it alone, what you're proud of, what keeps you up at night, what it felt like to succeed without any of us cheering you on. So I did. For the first time in my adult life, I told a family member about the loneliness of those early days in my studio apartment, about the terror and exhilaration of landing my first big client, about the responsibility I felt toward the 17 people who now depended on me for their livelihoods. I told him about clients who'd become like family, about the satisfaction of helping immigrant entrepreneurs achieve their American dreams, about the way success tasted different when you had no one to share it with. I told him about the late nights spent learning Google's algorithm changes, about the panic attacks I'd had before major client presentations, about the way I'd taught myself to celebrate alone because I'd gotten tired of having no one to call with good news. I told him about Linda Chen treating me like a daughter, about Giuseppe's family sending me homemade pasta every Christmas, about finding surrogate parents among clients who valued my contributions more than my biological family ever had. Carlos listened without interrupting, without checking his phone, without trying to relate everything back to his own experiences. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring out at Central Park, where families were enjoying the unseasonably warm November afternoon. "I'm proud of you," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now. What you've built is remarkable, and you did it without any of us believing in you. That makes it even more remarkable." "Thank you," I said, surprised by how much those words meant coming from him. "But I want to do more than just say I'm proud," he continued. "I want to invest in your company, not because of the Forbes article, not because everyone's suddenly paying attention, but because I believe in what you're doing. I have capital sitting around that could help you expand faster, take on bigger clients, maybe open that second office you mentioned in the article." I set down my water glass carefully. "Carlos, 6 months ago, you couldn't remember what I did for a living. A year ago, you introduced me to your business partners as your sister who does something with computers. Now you want to invest?" "Because I was wrong," he said simply. "Because I let my own insecurity make me blind to your talent. Because I want to be part of your success story, not just someone who shows up after it's written." Over the next 3 hours, we talked more honestly than we had since we were children. He told me about the pressure he'd felt to be the perfect son, the way success had sometimes felt like a prison of expectations, where any failure would disappoint everyone who'd invested in his image. I told him about the loneliness of achievement without acknowledgement, the way I'd built a business, partly to prove my worth to people who weren't paying attention. "Jessica wants to see you too," he said, as we shared a dessert that probably cost more than most people's grocery budget. "She's complicated about all this. I think she's jealous, honestly. She's worked in PR for 8 years and never gotten the kind of recognition you got from one article. She's also excited about potential collaborations, but I think there's some wounded pride mixed in." "She's welcome to call me," I said, "but I'm not going to chase anyone anymore. I'm done being the only one who tries, the only one who reaches out, the only one who remembers birthdays and anniversaries and important moments." "That's fair," he said. "More than fair. But Maya, if she does call, if any of us try to make this right, will you give us a chance? Not immediately, not without proving ourselves, but eventually?" I considered the question while watching a father teach his daughter to feed ducks in the pond across the street. The little girl was maybe 5 years old, squealing with delight every time a duck approached her outstretched hand. Her father was patient, encouraging, present in a way that made my chest tight with recognition of what I'd never had. "I'll give you chances," I said finally, "but they'll be earned, not assumed. And I won't pretend the past didn't happen just to make everyone comfortable." The family dinner the following Sunday was different from any we'd had in my 28 years of life. For the first time since I could remember, I was the center of attention. Not because I'd done something wrong or needed fixing, but because they were genuinely curious about my work, my life, my perspective on things that mattered. I arrived at my parents' house in Elmhurst at exactly 3 p.m., carrying a bottle of wine that cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a week and a sense of cautious optimism I hadn't felt about family gatherings in years. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the vinyl siding slightly faded, the front garden where my mother had always grown vegetables now converted to low maintenance, shrubs that required less time she didn't have. "Mija, come in." My mother greeted me at the door with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for visiting dignitaries or the priest's annual blessing of the house. She'd clearly spent hours cooking. I could smell the arroz con pollo, the black beans, the sweet plantains that were my childhood favorites, but that she hadn't made in years. My father was waiting in the living room, standing awkwardly by his recliner, as if he wasn't sure of the protocol for greeting his suddenly famous daughter. Roberto Rodriguez had aged in the months since I'd last really looked at him. His hair more gray than black now. His shoulders slightly stooped from decades of physical labor. But his eyes were bright with something I'd rarely seen directed at me. Genuine pride. "Maya, mi hija," he said, opening his arms for a hug that lasted longer than any physical contact we'd shared since I was a child. "You are in Forbes magazine." "Forbes." I bought 5 copies at the grocery store and gave them to all my friends at work. Everyone knows my daughter is a millionaire businesswoman now. The living room walls told the story of our family's priorities. Dozens of photos of Carlos's football achievements, Jessica's beauty pageant victories, family gatherings I'd attended but somehow never appeared prominently in. But there, newly framed and hung in the center of the display, was the Forbes article with my photo, my words, my success finally deemed worthy of the family shrine. "Tell your father about the clients," Mom said proudly, as if she'd been supporting my career all along. "Tell him about the families you help." Dad, who'd spoken maybe 50 words to me over the past 5 years about anything other than basic pleasantries, suddenly had questions about everything. My business model, my employees, my 5-year plan, my thoughts on helping other immigrant families build their dreams in America. "You know," he said, settling into his chair with a beer, and the kind of reflective mood that usually only appeared after his second drink. "When we came here from El Salvador, we had nothing. Just hope and the belief that in America, if you work hard enough, you can build something better for your children. I worked in that factory for 23 years because I wanted my kids to have choices I never had." He paused, looking directly at me with an intensity that made me sit up straighter. I thought success meant becoming a doctor or lawyer, something safe and respected. I never imagined that helping other families like ours could be a business, could make you rich and famous. You found a way to make money from kindness, from understanding what people need. That is very smart, mija. Very American. You always were the smart one, he continued, patting my hand with work-rough fingers that smelled like the industrial soap he'd used for decades. Quiet, but smart. I should have listened more. Jessica arrived an hour late, as always. But instead of her usual dramatic entrance complete with air kisses and loud announcements, she seemed subdued, almost shy. She looked beautiful as always. Perfectly styled hair, designer clothes that probably cost more than most people's rent, makeup applied with professional precision. But there was something fragile in her expression, a vulnerability I'd rarely seen from my supremely confident sister. "Congratulations on everything," she said, hugging me briefly and avoiding eye contact. "I'm sorry I haven't been present. I want to do better." "Thank you," I said simply, not ready to make it easy for her, but not cruel enough to make it impossible either. Dinner was surreal, like stepping into an alternate version of my family where I mattered, where my achievements were celebrated, where my voice was heard, and my opinions sought. Carlos arrived with his wife Rebecca and their 2 young children, who immediately gravitated toward me with the uninhibited curiosity of kids who didn't know they were supposed to find me boring. "Aunt Maya, Daddy says you're famous," announced Sophie, his 5-year-old daughter, climbing onto my lap with sticky fingers and complete confidence. "Are you going to be on TV?" "Maybe," I laughed, surprised by how natural it felt to be included in the family dynamics, to have a niece who actually wanted to talk to me instead of hiding behind her parents when I tried to engage. Throughout the evening, relatives called to congratulate me. Aunts and uncles who'd barely acknowledged my existence for years suddenly wanted to chat about my business, my plans, my thoughts on various opportunities they'd heard about. The phone rang constantly, each call another family member who'd just seen the article and wanted to catch up after months or years of silence. But perhaps the most telling moment came when my cousin Elena called during dessert. Elena, who'd spent years treating me like the family charity case, who'd actually suggested I aim lower when I'd mentioned wanting to start a business, who'd excluded me from her daughter's quinceañera without explanation. "She wants to know if you're looking for investors," my mother whispered, covering the phone's mouthpiece. "She says she has some money saved and wants to support family businesses." I shook my head firmly. "Tell her thank you, but I'm not taking on new investors right now." My mother relayed the message, and I could hear Elena's disappointed voice through the phone, immediately pivoting to ask about collaboration opportunities and whether I needed help with PR since she knew people in marketing. The evening felt like a strange performance where everyone was trying to rewrite history, to pretend that their sudden interest in my life was natural rather than opportunistic. But underneath the awkwardness was something genuine. My parents' obvious pride, Carlos's sincere remorse, even Jessica's complicated mix of jealousy and admiration. As the night wound down, I helped Mom clear the dishes, a ritual we'd rarely shared since I'd moved out. The kitchen was exactly as I remembered from childhood. Yellow walls with tiny flowers, the same Formica countertops, the refrigerator covered with magnets from places none of us had visited, but that relatives had, brought back as gifts. "I know you're angry with us," she said quietly, her hands busy with soap and water, her voice carrying the weight of years of accumulated guilt. "And you have every right to be. We failed you as a family. We took you for granted. And we didn't see what was right in front of us." "I'm not angry anymore, Mom," I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. "I'm just careful now. I've learned that I can't count on family love being unconditional. Sometimes it comes with conditions I don't even know about until I accidentally meet them." She stopped washing dishes, her hands still in the soapy water, suds clinging to her wedding ring. "What can we do to earn your trust back? How do we prove that we want to be better?" "Don't try to earn it all at once," I said. "Just be consistent. Show up for the small things, not just the big ones. Ask about my life when there's nothing in it for you. Love me when I'm struggling, not just when I'm successful. Include me in the group chats and the casual plans, not just the formal events where excluding me would look bad." 3 months later, I was sitting in my expanded office space in Dumbo, now occupying an entire floor of the building with 22 employees and a waiting list of potential clients that stretched into the next quarter. The Forbes article had led to 3 more major publications, a speaking engagement at the National Small Business Convention, and enough new business to require hiring a full-time HR manager just to handle the growth. My bank balance had crossed the $3 million mark, but more importantly, my life had gained something I'd given up hoping for: authentic family relationships that felt chosen rather than obligated. Carlos had become not just an investor, but a trusted advisor, someone I called when I needed perspective on big decisions or when I wanted to celebrate a major win. He'd invested $200,000 in the company, but more than that, he'd invested time, showing up to office events, asking thoughtful questions about my work, treating me like a business partner he respected rather than a little sister he tolerated. Jessica and I had started having monthly sister dinners, slowly building the relationship we'd never had as children. It was awkward at first, both of us navigating the unfamiliar territory of genuine interest in each other's lives. But gradually, we'd found common ground in our shared experience of family expectations, our different approaches to building careers, our mutual frustration with dating in New York City. I was jealous, she'd admitted during our third dinner, her perfect composure cracking slightly. I've been working in PR for 8 years, hustling for every piece of recognition, and you just did something amazing quietly, without any fanfare, and suddenly you're getting coverage I've only dreamed of. It made me realize how much of my own success depends on other people's approval. My parents called every week now, not to check on my romantic prospects or remind me of family obligations, but to hear about my work, my challenges, my victories. My father had started reading business magazines at the library, trying to understand my world well enough to ask informed questions. My mother had learned to navigate Instagram just so she could like and comment on my company's posts. But perhaps the most valuable lesson had come from watching how quickly family dynamics could shift when success entered the equation. The relatives who'd suddenly remembered I existed, the cousins who wanted to collaborate on business ventures, the aunts who'd started including me in group texts. They'd taught me to distinguish between people who loved me and people who loved what I could do for them. My chosen family, Sarah, David, Marcus, Jennifer, Tom, and the rest of my team, still gathered in my office most Friday afternoons for what we called family dinner, ordering takeout and celebrating the week's victories. These were the people who'd known my worth before the world recognized it, who'd supported my vision when it was just a dream in a cramped apartment, who'd chosen to build something beautiful together. Sarah had been promoted to Chief Operating Officer, managing the day-to-day operations that allowed me to focus on strategy and growth. David was now our Chief Technology Officer, leading a team of developers who were building proprietary tools for our clients. Marcus had become Creative Director, developing campaigns that regularly won industry awards. They were more than employees. They were the family I'd built from scratch, the people who'd believed in my vision when no one else would. The Chen family still insisted on feeding me every time I visited their restaurants. They now had 4 locations and were planning a 5th. Linda had started calling me her American daughter, insisting that I bring dates to family dinners so she could approve of my romantic choices. Their teenage daughter Amy was now a freshman at NYU, studying business with plans to help expand the family empire. She'd written her college application essay about watching me transform her parents' struggling restaurant into a thriving business, about learning that success came from understanding people's needs and helping them achieve their dreams. Giuseppe's Italian Kitchen had become one of our biggest success stories, growing from a single struggling restaurant to a small chain with locations throughout New Jersey and plans to expand into New York. Giuseppe himself, now 75, had become something of a surrogate grandfather, insisting that I join the family for every major holiday, and treating my successes as if they were his own grandchildren's achievements. As I finished reviewing the quarterly reports that would officially make Rodriguez Digital Strategies a $5 million company, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Dinner Sunday? Carlos is bringing the kids. Jessica's making her famous tres leches cake, and your father wants to show you the vegetable garden he's starting again. We miss you. Also, can Sarah come? She's never had authentic tres leches, and you know how I feel about people who haven't experienced proper Dominican desserts. I smiled, typing back. We'll both be there. Sarah's been asking about that recipe for months. Perfect, mija. She's family too now. Oh, and bring that nice boy from your office, the one with the good manners who always compliments my cooking. Tom? Your father wants to talk to him about investments. And in that simple exchange, I realized that the greatest success of all wasn't the money in my bank account, the awards on my wall, or the recognition from prestigious publications. was learning that family isn't just about DNA. It's about showing up, consistently and unconditionally, for the people who matter. It's about creating space at the table for those who've earned it through loyalty, love, and genuine care. True wealth, I'd learned, isn't just about having millions in the bank, though financial success had certainly made life easier and opened doors that had been closed to my parents' generation. It's about knowing who would still be there if those millions disappeared tomorrow. It's about building relationships that don't require a Forbes article to validate your worth. It's about understanding that the most valuable family is often the one you choose, the one that chooses you back, and the one that loves you not for what you've achieved, but for who you are when all the achievements are stripped away. The view from my office window was spectacular. Manhattan glittering in the afternoon sun, the East River flowing steadily toward the harbor, the bridge that connected Brooklyn to the rest of the world serving as a daily reminder of how far I'd traveled from that cramped studio apartment where this journey began. But the view of my life, filled with people who knew my value before the world put a price tag on it, was even better. My phone rang, and Sarah's voice came through the intercom. "Maya, Linda Chen is on line 1. Something about catering the company holiday party? And your mother called to ask if you want her to make extra tres leches for the office. Apparently she's worried your employees aren't getting enough homemade desserts." I laughed, thinking about how my two families, chosen and biological, had started to merge in ways I'd never imagined possible. "Tell Linda yes, and tell my mother that 22 people work here now, so she should probably plan accordingly. Also," Sarah continued, "there's a producer from 60 Minutes on line 2. They want to do a segment on successful female entrepreneurs who are helping immigrant families build businesses. And Jessica called to say she has some ideas for expanding our media coverage. Apparently she has connections at major publications who are interested in our story." As I prepared to take the calls that would likely shape the next chapter of my journey, I reflected on how much had changed in the year since that first Forbes article had shifted everything. I was still Maya Rodriguez, the quiet kid from Queens who'd built something remarkable from nothing. But I was also Maya Rodriguez, the entrepreneur who'd learned that success tastes sweetest when shared with people who genuinely care about your happiness, whether they're family by blood or family by choice. The greatest lesson of all had been discovering that when you build something valuable enough, the right people will find their way to your table, and the wrong people will reveal themselves through their sudden interest in sharing your success. The trick was learning to distinguish between the two, and having the courage to make room for genuine love while protecting yourself from opportunistic attention. And that's a kind of success no magazine article could ever capture, no award could ever validate, and no amount of money could ever buy. It's the success of knowing who you are, what you're worth, and who deserves access to the beautiful life you've built with your own two hands and an unshakable belief in your own potential.